Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the truth about greenwashing. This is the facts and the fiction, what it is and what we can do about it. It's the latest in Dorset Climate Action Network's series of what we like to think are leading edge discussions on the major issues arising out of the climate change and biodiversity loss debate. I'm Richard Thomas, and I'm your chair or MC for this evening. What I hope you'll find an entertaining as well as enlightening evening. So greenwashing, the truth. Greenwashing has been recently described by one commentator as the lie that could doom the world. That was a chap called Jackman in EcoExperts in October last year. Other definitions and descriptions are misleading or deceptive publicity disseminated by an organization so as to present an environmentally responsible public image, the cynical use by corporations of the presentation of a green image to gain a commercial advantage, activities by a company or an organization that are intended to make people think that it's concerned about the environment, even if its real business actually harms the environment, to publicly claim a commitment to the environment while quietly lobbying to avoid regulation, and the deliberate hiding of climate and environmental damaging practices behind a cloak of green tie-dye to give the impression of being climate and environmentally friendly for commercial or political gain. So you get the idea. Greenwashing is to manipulate, to mislead, deceive, cheat, lie. This evening, as well as welcoming all you good people, as I say, there should be about 40 people in the end, but at the moment we've got about 20. Welcoming you to we've got 3 and indeed now 4, if I include Giles, expert presenters who will give you an illustrated guide with slides through the various strands of the subject before we turn to you for your questions. Martin Brown will start us off this evening with a no-holds-barred explanation of what greenwashing is, its many faces and some of its worst culprits, and announcing the very latest developments and countermeasures. He's a veteran campaigner, writer, lecturer, blogger, influencer, and international consultant. He's worked in this field for some 50 years and has done extensive research into greenwashing, including writing the foreword to the 2022 booklet, the Anti-Greenwash Playbook, which is this very lovely little booklet. So then after Martin, we have Joanna Watchman. She'll explain her work with Gen Z or Generation Zero that I only recently discovered is the new term for young people, and how differently they're tackling the issue. Jo's an internationally known sustainability communicator or truth in marketing campaigner, as I see her, who runs Content Coms consultancy from Wiltshire and is the author and publisher of the Anti-Greenwash Playbook I just showed you. Her company specializes in creative content and communication strategies for companies in the energy, buildings, and manufacturing sectors, and has won B-Corp certification in 2023. Then comes Amber Harrison. She will describe how the rapidly growing B-Corp certification system could be the antidote to greenwashing lies. Her award-winning bookshop, Folde, Folde in Shaftesbury, recently awarded the best independent bookshop in the Southwest, became one of the latest businesses to win B-Corp certification in the UK. Amber will explain what it is, how it works, and why it could be an antidote. Before opening her bookshop, Amber spent 2 decades working in corporate sustainability and still advises businesses on the subject. We were supposed to have had a 4th speaker, Carl Warham from Dorset Council, to tell us how local councils see the greenwashing issue and whether the B Corp system or other means could work in local government and indeed government generally to help prevent greenwashing by councils and politicians. Carl is a policy officer within Dorset Council's newly expanded sustainability team. Sadly, however, Carl is unable to participate during the run-up to an election as this restricts how council officers can engage publicly. But I'm glad to be able to tell you that Dorset Can's co-founder Giles Watts, I don't know if you're co-founder or founder, Giles, but I've called you co-founder, has ridden to the rescue like John Wayne and has agreed to cover the subject for us. So a big thank you to you, Giles. Each presenter has 10 minutes to put their case to you, and then it's your turn to ask them questions. I'll explain the protocol for that for those unfamiliar with Zoom when we get to that part of the evening. And I have to confess to you that I'm one of those who's very unfamiliar with Zoom. So fortunately, I've got people like Giles who are operating the desk behind the scenes. So if I push the wrong buttons, hopefully they can save me from disaster. So bear with me if there's any struggle at any point. My main concern is to make sure that we have a full, fair and factual, but above all, a constructive as well as enlightening discussion this evening. I'll just say a few words about the Zoom protocol for those unfamiliar with it, as I said, and the apologies to those if I'm teaching grandmother here, but I'm told it's good advice, so let me put it over to you. So be present and open, stay visible, in other words. Use the reactions button to raise a hand to speak, and I'll see you. Another option is to put your question into the chat window on the left, and there are buttons along the bottom of the screen for this that most of you know all about, and I'm only just learning. Keep questions and comments concise, please. Mute yourself when not talking, and you can show any appreciation for any point or speaker by using the jazz hands, which is something, again, which is down the bottom somewhere, which I'm sure you'll know where to find better than I do. So unless there's any pressing procedural questions anyone's got, like now's the time to ask them. Anyone got any procedural questions? No, I can't see any. Thank you. Then let's get started. So we're going to hear from Martin Brown. Martin, first of all about what greenwashing is and why we should be worried about it. So over to you, Martin. Can you put all this into context for us, please?
I will certainly try. And yeah, good evening, everyone. It's delighted to be with you this evening on this important topic. And thanks for the introduction, Richard. That's yeah. That 50 years still frightens me. But, let me share my screen. And go to so just checking people can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. As I said, delighted to be with you. 10 minutes to talk about greenwashing. I'll try to get as much as I can across in 10 minutes, but it's such a huge topic. And as you said, Richard, it can be the one of the key issues that's really dragging us back on progress towards a thriving planet, a thriving future. Just a bit about myself. Mainly working in the construction industry and built environment for most of my career. Over the last 25 years or so, that's been in the environmental sustainability and now regenerative field. And I can talk about what regenerative means later if necessary. Probably more in context of this evening, I'm co-chair of the Longridge Environmental Group, which is also associated with the Ribble Valley CAN, Climate Action Network. So lots of familiarity with what you're doing in Dorset. I run my own consultancy, Fairsnape, named after a hill I can see when the trees aren't in leaf, which is based in the Forest of Bowland, which is midway between Preston and Lancaster, just to give you that context. I'm also vice president of an organisation based in Italy called Living Future Europe, which looks at various training, educational and support services. But yeah, greenwashing. I want to start by going back to the 1960s or 1970s with some pretty scary images. I'm not sure if people have seen these before, but yeah, back in the 1950s, 1960s, asbestos was the key miracle product. And adverts like this were quite common, I'm told, in the States. Yeah, never think of doing anything like this today. But did you know it took about 70 years from asbestos being recognized as being a carcinogenic, dangerous chemical for it to be completely banned? So adverts like this were commonplace. More recently, I guess into the 60s, going into the 70s, the whole thing about DDT in the States. DDT is a horrible chemical which was sprayed on beaches to keep sandflies down. It was sprayed on crops. It was, you can imagine the American glider flying over crop fields just spraying this stuff. Incredibly carcinogenic. And that led to a very influential lady called Rachel Carson to write probably one of the most influential books in environmental management or environmental thinking, called Silent Spring. I guess most of you would be familiar with it. If you haven't, it really is a must read. So that was published in the late 60s and became part of one of the driving forces behind the environmental movement in the States and then here in the UK and around the world. The idea that we are just killing all biodiversity, etc. But when we're talking about greenwashing, these adverts were commonplace. That DDT is good for me. Asbestos is good for me. And it's taken a long time to get rid of those adverts, but that's only been done so through legislation. And I'll come back to talk about legislation in a few more moments. Bringing that bang up to date, there was a fantastic article in The Guardian beginning of May, 2 or 3 weeks back, and asked the question, is this our silent spring? And here we have a blatantly greenwashed advert for plastic grass, making all these claims. It's 100% recyclable, it's green, and it's eco-friendly. It's safe and healthy. Doesn't say it's safe and healthy for users. Doesn't say it's safe and healthy for wildlife. That's a big issue. But then when you look at the expert views, the eco-expert views, we can find out that 1 in 10 UK homes has an artificial lawn. An artificial grass destroys ecosystems. It leaches microplastics into the atmosphere, into the watercourses, and indeed into ourselves and into our blood courses. And we know it's one of our big problems at the moment. And it emits a phenomenal amount of CO2. And when you look at what the experts are telling us, despite manufacturing claims, artificial grass is impossible to recycle. And yet here we have the advert. I've actually cropped this to take the name off the top, but there are thousands. Just do a quick Google search for plastic grass, and you'll see there's so many adverts to this. And when you think about 3 million gardens in the UK have been lost beneath plastic grass, that's pretty scary. And it's all being driven by adverts which are saying 100% recyclable, clean, easy, friendly for all, etc. Richard, I've shared these slides with you, and you can share them onto the people here, and you'll be able to dig into these links. So I just use that as an example of what we've got to do in terms of greenwashing. So why greenwash? Well, very privileged that Joanne invited me to write forward to her anti-greenwashing playbook, which is a brilliant little book. It's a nice little giveaway, conversation starter at so many places. But in the introduction to that, I share a thought that maybe greenwashing is our fault. And I say our fault in terms of the sustainability movement, the consultants and marketeers and people who are in this space. Because we've created such a complicated language, and we've made it easy for people to hide behind that language. So we can use words like eco-friendly, sustainable, regenerative, etc. And there are 1,000 different definitions for what that means. When we talk about carbon neutral, is that the same as carbon positive or carbon negative or net zero carbon? So when we see those on packaging, when we see that, it's very difficult to understand what they mean. And those who greenwash play on that. And it's a very successful marketing strategy. And if you think about it, the people who buy eco products or buy these types of sustainable products are probably willing to pay a little more for them. So it's a profitable marketing strategy as well. But I think the bottom line here really is it's because they can. That they can get away with these things. Maybe they get pulled up, but they just take that advert away again. And Richard, something you alluded to, the different definitions of greenwashing, not necessarily go through all these, but yeah, we've got green lighting, we've got green shifting, we've got green labeling, we've got all sorts of things in there. Just want to talk about one or two of these. And the one which really gets me is this, I'm not sure what green lighting or green masking. We're seeing more and more products, more and more major events being sponsored by fossil fuel companies and banks which invest a lot in fossil fuels. There's been a big event in London recently called Innovation Zero, and that's highly promoted by the fossil fuel industry. So they're pretending to be green, they're pretending to promote these wonderful things, but at the same time, they're pumping billions into the fossil fuel industry. And then when we start looking at the scale of the greenwashing, and I was looking at some research from Ireland recently, where they identified that 42% of all adverts are probably greenwashing or deceptive to some degree. 42%. But then only 3% of people that they involved in the survey could correctly identify what the greenwash adverts were. And one of the conclusions from that is that the more literate we are on climate issues, the less trustful we become of genuine organizations and genuine products. You'll see the background one here was one from HSBC, which was actually banned by the Advertising Standards Agency because of promoting one thing and doing another. One of the things we talk about in the sustainable regenerative space is moving from things which were degenerative to things which are regenerative. So effectively, we need to do more of the green stuff, and we need to do less of the orange stuff on this chart here. So in the green space, we've got the good guys, people who are trying to make a better future for us. They're trying to heal the future. And in the green space, in the orange space, which we should do less of, we got those who are harming the future, the bad guys, if you like. And just to mention two products, there's this one from Windex. I think this advert was banned as well. They're trying to pretend that the bottle is 100% recyclable, but it's made from ocean-bound plastics. Now, what does ocean-bound plastic means? There's no definition behind this at all. Very confusing. Trouble is, people will buy that rather than buy the good stuff. And an example of the good stuff is, and I've got a lot of time for an organization called Faith in Nature. Since 1974, they've been in this green space. And over the last 5 years, they've had a CNO, a Chief Nature Officer. So all the decisions made in the company go through that nature officer. It's like having a conscience to them. And we could take loads of products and we could put them on the regenerative side or on the degenerative side, the bad guys or the good guys. So what can we do? Interestingly, what's happened in Europe, the EU passed a law recently to ban campaigns and to ban products and the packaging, etc., which uses terms like sustainable, carbon neutral, climate neutral, biodegradable, eco-friendly, without having some sort of certifiable proof to that. And I think that's something we should adopt in the UK. I think it's fine to educate people, but I think research is showing even if we're well educated, we can still be hoodwinked by all this greenwashing. And you'll see the little chart there. There's the acceptable standards and the various. I'm looking forward to hearing about the B-Corp, probably from Joanne and from Folde's books. We have a fantastic opportunity in the next few weeks. We've got an election coming up in the UK, which gives us a rare opportunity to speak to candidates, to speak to our potential MPs, and raise the issue of greenwashing. And we can do that on our doorstep. If we live in towns, they'll be knocking on our door. We say, hey, how about more legislation on this? And we can do it in correspondence, and we can do it in hustings should we attend those. And sorry to get political, or apolitical, I get them as who you vote for, but we should be a climate voter. I think if you're part of a climate action network, you would agree with that. We need to vote the environment and raise the issue of greenwashing legislation with our candidates. Sorry, Richard, I've talked for a bit longer than the 10 minutes there, but I'll pass back to you.
That's fine, Martin. Thank you very much. Can we now go to Joe? So, Joe, how do Gen Z, Generation Zero, see all this?
Well, can you hear me is the first question.
I can.
You can. Good. Right. Okay. So in that case, I can try and get into my slides, and so I don't make up. So thank you, Dorset, for sitting and listening to me this evening. I'm over the border in Wiltshire, North Wiltshire, so the furthest point away from you. And that doesn't mean to say that Dorset's not a favourite county. So I'm Jo Watchman. My company is called Content Communications. We're actually based in West Wiltshire, not far from Bradford-on-Avon, if you fancy a visit. Our client work takes us all over Northern Europe, but we're a specialist communications company. We are B-Corp certified, like Amber's business, and that's something we're desperately proud of. And Amber's going to go into the detail on that, so I'm not going to steal any thunder there. But Content Coms is a very niche company, and part of the work that we do is around sustainability communications for businesses. And some of that work touches really on how we can communicate to all types and all stakeholders and all groups of people. And of course, those groups sometimes include people of vastly different age groups, which is why I was keen to look at the Gen Z, the Gen Z topic this evening. Just as a little aside, purely in case it's of interest, but I also set up a website called workinmind.org about 5 years ago this year, which attracts about 50 to 60,000 readers a year. We do it for entirely without any commercial purpose. But it's all around healthy buildings and workplaces and how the built environment impacts on physical and mental health. And it's a very interesting topic, and perhaps something that Deekan could kind of come back to, because it's I just thought I'd mention that. So what I'm going to cover is some definitions. Who is Gen Z, Generation Z? I'm told today by an actual Gen Zer, don't under any circumstances say Generation Z because you'll look stupid and uncool, so I can't say that. I'm going to look at some statistics with you, and I just think they're fascinating. And I'm also going to look at some takeaways. And I know that there will be people on here, some of you might have businesses, some of you won't, some of you may be retired, but there's some things in there for all of us to sort of to take note of. So the first thing I want to just be clear about is, who on earth is Gen Z? Well, different generations. I'm sure some of you looking probably could be baby boomers. Every generation kind of comes with a nicely packaged up name these days. And the Generation Z, Gen Z, were born between 96 and 2010. And according to McKinsey, the big research, multidisciplinary consulting business, that group makes up more than 40% of the world's consumer population at the moment. And I find that astonishing. And to be honest with you, I hadn't appreciated that. But of course, when you know that, it means that you have to be very conscious, particularly if you're like me and you're a marketeer, or you're like Amber running a business. You have to be very mindful that you understand what motivates that group of people, because they are the people who are out there spending the money. It's worth just saying that there is another generation, which are the millennials, which kind of are the ones that are slightly older. So those are born in the 80s up to sort of 81 to 96, and so they're the slightly older ones, but they think and feel in a very similar way, these two groups. And this is one of my favorite. Martin Brown will have seen this a million times, this quote, because poor Martin and I sits on a lot of stuff where he has to listen to me rattling on presentations. But this is one of my favorite quotes, and I use it time and time again. It's from Forbes, the business magazine. But with every generation, the quest for sustainability strengthens. And I think that's very powerful, because that's exactly what we see with the behaviours and the way that the sort of thinking and the feeling and the beating heart of Generation Z. But the truth is, everybody, that this is a generation of youngsters. They are prepared to take action, and they are speaking with their feet. They're using that power and their decision making and their purchasing to really kind of reflect their very deeply felt values around sustainability. And I'm sure that those are going to call, some of you may have, if your children are all kind of grown up and in a slightly different group, or you have grandchildren or whatever, or you have cause to spend time with younger people, you will recognize this in the people that you know. But there is no doubt that Generation Z uses its power in a very particular way, and that kind of brings with it all sorts of questions around how we communicate, and of course greenwash is part of that. But the thing is that what makes this generation unusual is that they are the first of the what you would call digital natives, the truly digital natives. They everything they do, is around their smartphones and technology, and they are absolutely in tune with inauthenticity, and that is something to be very mindful of as communicators. They will not put up with, and they will sniff out whatever verb we want to put in there, greenwashing. They are hyper conscious of it. And that was actually that quote there was from NASDAQ, the American listing index, stock exchange listing index. And I thought that was a really powerful point. So in terms of some of the statistics, as I say, this is the generation that demands action. So let's just have a little look at some of the numbers. And because we've only got 10 minutes, I couldn't really justify putting in stuff here about millennials as well, because the millennials, the slightly older generation, born in the 80s up to the mid-90s, they also have data attached to them around sustainability and greenwash and their views on that, which are very, very similar, actually. And I'm very happy to sort of share some of the data sources. But every year, Deloitte, who are, I'm sure a lot of you will know as the big consulting firm, produce really good content, really good survey data, including one on Gen Z and millennial attitudes. And this particular survey set of data was, as you can see from the slide, comes from 44 countries, 22,000 youngsters surveyed. But the thing that you'll find is that the numbers are really quite high when it comes to concerns for the environment. So there's the anxiety around environmental issues. 60% report that that's something they feel anxious about. And I think actually the specifics of that stat were that was something they felt anxious around in the previous month to being surveyed. So it's something that's very sort of current in their worries. The Gen Zs, they are actively making choices about the things that they do from an environmental perspective, particularly they're not driving, they're avoiding fast fashion. And I've got you know a small business with 3 of them working for me, and that reflects those individuals, I have to say. The third point there about that Gen Z is willing to pay for more sustainable products and services, which again I find fascinating, because again, for people running business, perhaps you know, that shows that they are discerning, they are asking big questions. And what I find really interesting is, of course, all of this really impacts, all these behaviours and characteristics impacts on the career choices that these youngsters will make. They are seriously investigating and looking into the environmental policies and sustainability policies of companies before they accept a role. They will make changes to their careers based on those factors. And I know in our own company, and as I say, we're a small 10 of us in the consultancy, but I know that the impacts page on our website is the most visited page. It's not the news pages, it's not the about page, it's not you know, some of the sector stuff that we do. It's people trying to engage with what we do and how we make an impact, because that's the kind of the beating heart. And I think going back to this point about what kind of matters to these youngsters, you know, this all has a really big impact on the sort of business's profit, you know, productivity, because, you know, attracting and retaining talent is a real problem. And I think the thing is that all of this matters when you're communicating. And greenwash, really, it's almost wish it could be rebranded, but you know, all of us are communicating all of the time with somebody or other. And I think businesses obviously are doing it all the time. And people like us and your network need to be kind of mindful that that greenwash can kind of seep in anywhere. But my view is that these younger generations are going to find you out, if you like, if you do not demonstrate that you are authentic, you are valid in the things that you're saying. And I think the greenwash piece in the jigsaw, you know, if for anybody of any kind, business or not, you know, if greenwash is part of the mix, even if you're doing it because you're sloppy and lazy rather than because you're being naughty, I think you are going to get found out. So my I've got 3 sort of takeaways here. So I would say, you know, if for anybody, for any reason, if you're needing to kind of engage and talk in the broadest terms to younger generations, and you're perhaps struggling to connect, struggling to engage, I would say that particular generation needs to be kind of understood, and the things that motivate them and mean something to them, you need to kind of understand that in order to make that connection. They are a very choosy, very discerning generation. They will not put up with, as I say, anything where they can see or feel that inauthenticity. Transparency, the word that's kind of the flavour of the day these days. If you look at the data and you look at articles on this, or you go away from this evening, you think, oh, you know, I want to kind of expand more. I want to find out more about this topic. And you know, if you go and Google millennials or Generation Z and greenwash, you'll discover that it's a cause of great concern for companies. You know, whether it's brands, whether it's advertising agencies, it could be universities, it could anything. Anybody who's out there trying to connect and talk to these generations, if they are not doing it in a way that demonstrates transparency, if it looks like you're trying to hide something, if it looks like you're not being authentic and true to yourself, these younger generations will vote with their feet. The greenwash just kind of won't work. And in a lot of the work that I do in my day job, I often find, I'm sure Amber and the work that she does, which I think is in a similar field, Amber's consulting work, but I think the truth is, companies are terrified, I think, often about doing and saying the wrong thing. So sometimes they just don't say it. And my advice is say something, but tell the truth. Be truthful about kind of where you are at in your progress on sustainability, for example. But don't hide away. Don't think that you're not going to be found out, and certainly don't make things up. All of those things are kind of part of that sort of greenwash rinsing. And I appreciate that a lot of you may not be in the market for kind of taking on staff. They may not be running businesses, but I would say that if you are, or you know people that are, I would urge that the dialogue really around kind of attracting and retaining talent. It is such a problem in this country, finding good young people, because there aren't enough of them. That this stuff really matters. And if you're a business owner and you want to recruit, you really need to demonstrate how your business makes an impact, and how that young person coming to work for you could make an impact themselves. They want to do that. They want to do things better. So a little bit of a checklist from me, just to wrap up. So don't ignore this generation. They're not going to be. They need to be taken seriously, and they need to be listened to. In terms of communication and greenwash, you really need to kind of mind your language. Think, companies really need to think about the things that they say, and they need to be called out on anything that is not truthful, because they will be found out. And I think the other thing I'd say, which is point 2, I've done those and switched them around, but is that for any generation, not just Gen Z, but Gen Z particularly, they want to be communicating in a way that is very upfront, very direct, and very human. I think that inauthenticity of communication, and we see it. I was watching the leaders debate thing last night, and then stuff on ITV afterwards with all of the leaders of the parties. And I was thinking, if only all these people talk like human beings, everybody would kind of connect with what they said a little better. So those are kind of three points just to wrap up. And there's some of my own Gen Zers, there's at least 3 of them I can see there, plus me kind of being the old one at the end. Just a little aside, the Greenwash book, which put together, and also on the right hand side, the regenerative playbook, which is actually we worked on with Martin, and they're available from the Content Coms website, but they're a really good read. I know we're answering questions at the end, but so there we are. That's me.
Thanks, thanks, Joe. Before we go to Amber, I just want to read a news flash that's come in on the BBC website, which is particularly germane to what Joe's just been saying. It reads, the world's fossil fuel industries should be banned by governments from advertising to help save the world from climate change, the head of the United Nations said today. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called coal, oil, and gas corporations the, quotes, godfathers of climate chaos, unquotes, who had distorted the truth and deceived the public for decades. And then he mentions tobacco advertising being in the same category, and so on and so forth. But it's obviously something that's extremely topical. So at that point, can we now go to Amber and hear from you, Amber? Tell us about this B-Corp certification. Is it the answer, and is it and what are its limitations?
Thanks, Richard. And hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I think B-Corp is a really interesting one, and it's something that we've been learning about over the process of going through it over the last couple of years. So I'll take you through what we've done and some of our thoughts along the way. Just as kind of an aside to Joanna's, we have quite a lot of Gen Z people come into our shop and they're looking particularly for books around nature and the environment, and they're much more keen to protest and take a stand against things that they think aren't right. So we see it very actively in the shop and with the people we engage in on social media as well. So it's quite nice for that to happen. So I'm one of the co-founders and owners of Folde, and we're a bookshop that focuses on nature writing, and that's everything from rewilding and regenerative farming to nature memoirs and nature guides, as well as having traditional art and crafts from local makers. And we opened 3 years ago at the top of Gold Hill in Shaftesbury. Now this year, 3 years later, we became a B-Corp in April, and it's something that we had right at the start of our plan. So we set up our business with very much a connection to nature in mind. And we had a set of values, you can see them on the screen here. And we wanted to make sure that they didn't just live as a document, that they were active, that we were talking about them and we were putting our money where our mouth was. So right from day one, we wanted this to be a basis for how we do our business. And that kind of brought us to the B-Corp process. So we wanted to know and be clear that how we made our day-to-day interactions, our decisions about who to work with, how we run our business and our plans for the futures had to have something sustainable and credible at the heart. So that's why we decided to work towards B-Corp. So the question, what is a B Corp? Well, put simply, B Corp organisations are leaders in the global movement for an inclusive, equitable and regenerative economy. And B Lab, who are the body who look after B Corps, they're quite unique because they measure a company's entire social and environmental impact. And if you're wondering, do you know any B Corps, if you recognise the names of companies like Patagonia, Aesop, Finisterre, Allbirds, Body Shop, Charlie Bigham's, who does excellent pies, and Able and Cole, they're all B Corps. St Jude Ice Cream as well, Marshfield Ice Cream, all of those people have gone through the process, and we're proud to be part of that network. Now, what's interesting is it's a growing movement, particularly in the UK. So over the last 18 months, the number of B Corps who've been certified in the UK has actually doubled. And just in April, it passed 2,000 certified B Corps of all shapes and sizes across all sorts of different industries. But there's nearly 8,500 across the world. I think it's 8,496 as of about 6 p.m. this evening. So it's something that's really strong and really credible. And you'll see from a couple of figures here that B Corp companies represent $150 billion of revenue and over 250,000 employees. So it is very much a movement with meaning. Now, it's one thing that people often think is it can be a bit of a tick box exercise. It really, really isn't. So kind of to start the process, you need to be able to achieve what they call a B impact assessment score of 80 points. And to get to that 80 points is really tough. There are 5 business areas that B Corp looks for. So it's governance, workers, environment, community, and customers. And one of the things I like about the B Corp process is any organisation, whether it's a sole trader or a multi-million global company, can go onto B Corp and start their own business impact assessment for free. And depending on the type of organisation you are, your location, your size, it takes you through a series of gates which tells you the information that it feels is important for you to provide. And what's important to note about B Corp as well is that it has a risk assessment. So if you are an arms dealer, if you have a very high polluting series of customers that you support, you're just simply excluded from the process. You can't be part of that process. So there is kind of a risk piece that comes through. What's interesting is when most companies start out, they get a score of about 50 based on where they are. Quite a few people have a lot less. A few have a lot more, but that 80, and it's not 80 out of 100, by the way, that 80 is quite tough to get. So the first step, and again, I think something that makes B Corp interesting, is you need to make a legal commitment to changing your corporate governance structure. So for us, that was changing our articles of association to make us more accountable to all our stakeholders, not shareholders, but stakeholders. So people like our community, our customers, our suppliers, and those we work with. Once you've kind of completed your assessment, you can then start to go through the different elements that it recommends where you aren't meeting what you need. So it might be around policies, it might be around meeting diversity reporting, it could be around understanding your environmental impacts. And the idea is that it's an iterative process. So over time, you set yourself targets, and the B-Corp platform allows you to set yourself goals and you can measure your progress. So it's all about continuous improvement. It's not you fill it in once, that's it, you have it for life. Not at all. The idea is that you move on, you make progress. And as Joanna said, nobody is perfect from the start. You need to be showing that you're moving towards something a little bit better. So for us, end to end, it took us a small company with 315 square feet of trading in a fairly safe industry in rural Dorset. It took us 8 months end to end, and I was in and out of the tool at least 2-3 times a week. So it's a process that's not for the faint-hearted. It is rigorous. It's demanding, as anything worthwhile and credible should be. And when you go through your verification process, you're assigned somebody who does go through every single document. They look at everything that you put up. They come back and they query, they check, they double check. So, for example, one of the elements of B Corp is to work with local suppliers. You have to work with at least 50% of local suppliers. That's quite tough when you're in some industries, but you have to provide all those evidence which says these are the suppliers, this is the spend, this is where they are, so that you can have fact-based evidence that backs that up. Now, once you've got it, as I mentioned, it's not just a question of saying, hurrah, I've got a new label. You have to, every 3 years, reconfirm to these standards and again show that progress. So you need to be making steps towards improving. Something else that I really like about B-Corp, and my background is in sustainability, and transparency and accountability are words I use an awful lot when I'm working with kind of clients when I'm not on a bookshop day. And transparency is really, really important. If you're not being transparent about what you're doing, you could be hiding things. You might be choosing not to talk about particular topics, so greenwashing, or you could just be bending the truth. And that's not a good thing to do either. So with B-Corp, you can look up any of the B Corp organisations in the world, any of the 8,496, and see what their score is. So for us on the left-hand side here, there's our Folde Dorset score. So our score is 97.2. So you'll see here the yellow average score, and then the green, which is your qualification, and then the blue, which is our overall score. Tony's Chocolonely, who've been certified since 2013 and do the most excellent chocolate you will ever have, they are at 125. And you can look through each of the different levels around governance, workers, community, environment, and customers and see how they're scoring against each of those topics. So you can compare companies like for like, and that gives you visibility and credibility. So for us, for example, because of the sector we're in bookselling and we're in nature, under our environmental tab, you'll find environmental management, air and climate, water, land and life, and all these tie in with the UN SDGs as well, which we support. But for us, we have an extra theme, which is environmental education and impact, which talks about what we're doing as a business in ensuring that we are educating people around the environment and things that they can do. So each impact score is slightly different, but there are some areas which are key all the way across. Now, in between the 3-year renewal process, you also need to produce a publicly available annual impact report so that progress can be viewed by anybody. And for us, we've always had sustainability on our website. We talk about where our carbon impacts are. We talk about our carbon footprint. We talk about how we engage with the community. We talk about waste. It's all very exciting. But this kind of level of visibility and transparency has, again, always been at the heart of what we do as a business with purpose and with deliberate intent. Now, things change. B Corp, the standard as it's been, has been around for a little while. So it is evolving at the moment, and it's been undergoing a consultation and review over the last couple of years. Expectations are changing, legislation is changing. There's a lovely new directive called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, for example, which is driving a lot of change in organisations as they have to look at their supply chain for reporting standards. So we're starting to see a shift in the landscape around corporate sustainability, and that's being reflected in B Corp as well. So there are updated standards in consultation. And again, with transparency, you can go and take a look at the standards. And the idea now is that you have to meet a minimum score at the foundation level, which is really around your governance and your structure. And then you need to meet scores against each of the impact areas. So the impact topics, things like operations, stakeholder engagement, and the value chain. And they are defining very clear and universally applicable impact management actions that you must meet to achieve and maintain your certification. So it's not good enough to be kind of where you are now. You need to be meeting minimum standards, and that's really, really important. The new standards are also going to focus on the most important social and environmental issues facing people and the planet. And if anybody has not come across the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report, it's a free download, brilliant report which talks about things like changing climate and biodiversity loss and loss of natural resources. You're starting to see elements like that, really big macro elements coming into these frameworks around which organizations are building their response to sustainability, and B Corp is the same for there. So this new and renewed framework is going to be, I think, much better at reducing greenwashing, because you're holding yourselves up to account against a consistent standard. There's no there's no kind of nice fluffy green logo you can put on and say, I'm a B Corp. You have to put in the work, the effort. It costs money. For us as a small business, it's cost us £1,000 to do this. So it's not something that you take lightly. It's part of our business strategy. And so for us, it means that we are being seen as being more credible. It holds us to account as business owners. And it's something that we talk to our employees about, we talk to our communities about it, and we talk to our consumers about it. And hopefully that helps to build more credibility and trust and accountability. Okay, so that's us and B Corp.
Thank you, Amber. Right. Well, that was lots of stuff there I hadn't heard about before. Thank you very much indeed. So lastly then, and by no means least, let's go to Giles, and he can now give us the, hang on, I'm watching the screen changing in front of my eyes. Okay, so Giles is now going to talk about greenwashing and local government, which is a completely different field from the commercial world. So Giles, let's hear your version of events.
Great, thanks very much. Just like the others, can you hear me okay, Richard?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Yeah, I sort of stepped into this a little bit accidentally because unfortunately Carl couldn't be here tonight. I've not worked in government myself, either national or local, but I've become the sort of the DCAN link with Dorset Council. And so over the last few years, I've become quite familiar with the processes that they've gone through and what they've done with their climate and ecological emergency strategies. So when Carl had to step down, I unfortunately agreed to step in, but please don't ask me too many detailed questions. So starting off with national government, the UK was actually the first major economy to have legally binding climate targets. And that comes down to the Climate Change Act in 2008, which set the government's climate duties and evidence-based targets for legally binding carbon budgets. These are assessed by an organisation called the UK Climate Change Committee, the UKCCC, which provides a robust framework for checking government's plans and delivery to see if they are greenwashing or not. And there are three things here which are really key, and they're along the bottom of this slide. The first is that the CCC produces annual evaluations of government's progress against these legally binding targets, and there's no sugarcoating in the annual reports, and they're well worth reading if you get a chance. And they're quoted very often in public. Secondly, since they have statutory duties, this opens the possibility of judicial review, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then the third thing is that another very useful source of information on scrutiny of government comes from Parliament's own select committees. So that provides an additional range of information. Of course, government's views on climate have unfortunately become very political recently. I would have said that's something which is relatively new, but it has become an electioneering topic, which is very disappointing actually, because it means that parties are forced to take choices. And you'll have seen, our current government has made some significant choices about the LTNs, the neighbourhoods. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. The issue in Uxbridge, where the after COVID, they were setting up areas which were free of traffic, and that was deemed to be quite controversial. But in the last 18 months, we've also seen the government step away from their commitment to stop petrol and diesel cars being put back from 2030 to 2035, and also the directive that was going to see the phasing out of gas central heaters on all new buildings by 2025 has also been set back indefinitely. So these are real issues, how governments are meeting their responsibilities. I'm just going to talk very quickly about one legal challenge. So you may have seen in the news last month that a legal challenge was made by Friends of the Earth, Planet Earth, and the Good Law Project, and they effectively took the government to court for a judicial review about their climate policies. They lost. The campaigners claimed that the risks in the plan had not been considered properly, and that the plan was therefore unsound. And they succeeded in persuading the judge that that was the case. So the government was defeated in court, rather embarrassingly for them, and they will now be required to go back and redraft their plan. However, this is not the first time this has happened. This is the second time it's happened. And the first time they rewrote the report with a new 3,000-page report. And this is the one that has failed for second time round. So I think the moral of the message is that, be quite wary of what politicians are telling you, and make sure you see what what is actually tested in court or not. If you just go into a little bit more about the Climate Change Committee, what they do is they set a series of budgets which show how the government is going to meet the targets. So that black line there is the one showing the emissions of the country going back to 1990 and finishing on net zero in 2050. So in order for this legally binding contract to be valid, they've not only got to do it today, but they've got to show how in the future they're going to be able to achieve that downturn in emissions. And you'll see that to begin with, they did very well, which is largely related to decarbonising the energy generation industry, effectively phasing out coal. But from 2020 onwards, it becomes much more difficult. And those are the challenging times that we live in at the moment. So moving on to local government. For local government, the situation is somewhat different. Councils have come to take climate more seriously over recent years. And in fact, over 300 councils have now declared climate emergencies. But it's not clear how councils fit into national plans for net zero, and they have no real statutory duties. And neither is there any core funding for them to reduce their climate footprint. So indeed, what they have to do is to compete against each other, against other councils, for short-term funding pots in order to take on their own climate challenges, such as retrofitting in their own estates. And this makes it hard for us to evaluate their performance and to see whether there's a level playing field for comparison. So there's no standard reporting in England either. Although the government has promised guidance and reporting from 2025, I believe there is a standard reporting in Scotland. So that's one of the regional differences. And the independent review of net zero from last year identified the lack of a clear framework for councils, as did the Local Government Association, the LGA, who have also made similar calls. And all this makes it quite difficult to evaluate local governments as regards their performance, for greenwashing without a set framework. But thankfully, our councils have done a reasonably good job of, I mean, both our councils, as in Dorset Council and BCP, have detailed plans and they report on their progress to their scrutiny committees. And that gives the public, i.e. us, a chance to actually see what they are doing and planning to do and to comment on that. I think the one thing I'd say in general about the performance of our council, in particular the Dorset Council, is that they put a lot of effort into the 1.5% of Dorset's emissions which are within their direct control, but the 98.5% which are not within the direct control, but which they can influence, has a lot less consideration. And that's the area that we're really going to have to tackle if, as a county, we are going to be able to get down to net zero. So what are the barometers? What can we use to evaluate their performance? Well, there are a few useful documents out there, which are the ones along the top. There's the Climate Change Committee's 2020 Local Authorities and Sixth Carbon Budget Report. These are all a bit of a mouthful. There's the Commons Library 2023, the role of local government in reaching net zero briefing note. And you can go on with some of these distant documents, but these are difficult documents which very few of us in practice will get round to read. So I think what we're more likely to do is to look at the bottom set, and these are independent organisations that are starting to take on the role of comparing and evaluating our councils and allowing us to see how they are performing. So these are independent standards and accreditation systems, which some of which have been around for some time, like the ISO standard. You may have heard of ISO 9001, which is the HSE standard, and ISO 14001, which is the Environmental Management System standard. One quite interesting one, which has started up a few years ago, is the Climate Emergency UK, which now rates all the local authorities on a regular basis, on a yearly basis. And you can see here on this slide the scorecard, and I've picked out the two tabs for Dorset Council and BCP Council. And you can see that Dorset Council was rated quite a reasonable 35 out of 190 of this particular category, the single tier category of local councils, and BCP a bit further down, but still in the top half, just at 92 out of 190. Now, when I last spoke to Dorset Council about this, there was some acrimony about it. They essentially evaluate the council in these 8 different areas using a number of different questions which are asked about them. So a bit like B-Corp, though significantly less rigorous. The council were complaining that some of their answers have been misinterpreted, or they don't feel they'd had correct evaluation of them. But overall, the councils are actually quite supportive of this process, because apart from anything, it allows them to then compare with their neighbours and see where they're doing better or doing worse, and where they can learn a thing or two. So it's a useful process. Finally, my final slide is just to make the comment about the councils themselves and the plans and progress reporting they do. BCP report annually on their progress against their targets. Dorset Council do it biannually, so twice a year, and one of them reports on the new monitoring which is a government-based monitoring of what their carbon emissions are, and is always 2 years out of date, which is another issue about how you compare it when you've got old information all the time. And then the second one in the year is about updating their plans to reflect what they're going to do to do that. In general, it's a very good process, but it needs scrutiny, and it needs organisations like DCAN, I believe, to keep them on track. And that's what we try and do, is be a scrutinising partner to keep them on track. That's all I've got to say on local and national government. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Well, thank you for that, Giles. Thank you for standing in, and I think you did a pretty good job, actually, given the short notice. Now we come to opening the thing up for some questions. I know I've had on the chat a couple of possible questions, one from Rosemary, and one from Sam, I think. Rosemary, do you want to ask your question about the fast fashion? Where are we?
Hello, I'm not sure if it is a question, but who's buying fast fashion if it isn't the millennials and Generation Z?
So you're questioning the integrity of the Gen Z that Joe was waxing lyrical about. Joe, do you want to defend that?
I don't think I'm here to defend or anything. The points I made, all of the points that I've presented are from reputable sources, and I think the point about the fast fashion thing, I get that. What I'm trying to do really is to give you the broadest brush, and I think, you know, as an employer myself and watching the change in what motivates my young team members, and as somebody who works in a services-based business, i.e. we have, you know, 20, 30 clients, so we see companies and we see the changing shifts in those companies of the youngsters they employ. It feels to me as though the sort of stuff I've presented this evening, you could kind of look at all this and say, oh yeah, that's all broad brush stuff. It's you know, but it feels to me as though actually there is a real beating heart to these youngsters, and that they really do seem to conform to type. And weirdly, one of my master's grads who we took on in the business last May actually did her thesis on the fast fashion thing, I believe, at Bristol. And I notice that Patrick Grant, the guy that does the sewing bee, is just, I saw something in the Telegraph today that he's written something on this as well. And so you know, yes, I'm probably not giving you a specific answer. I think, yes, I get your point, but I think we're trying to paint the broadest stereotype. But in my experience, from lots of angles, I think it's a very accurate one. But do you have any thoughts? Because you have customers coming in, and you made a point about you know, your customer base and the things that motivate them and the questions you kind of get asked. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a lot of younger people coming in, and I think this is where social media is interesting. And I saw a lovely quote the other day which said, if you imagined 20 years ago that Carol Vorderman and Fergal Sharkey would be your greatest environmental critics 20 years down the line, you'd have wondered what on earth was going on. But the truth is they are, in terms of making awareness around things like water quality, or holding people to account. And so you have a lot of young people who are aware of some of the issues through social media channels. I think what's also interesting as well, I've got a 21-year-old goddaughter. She was into kind of fast fashion maybe when she was 12 or 13. From about the age of 14, she's very much into vintage, what she can make, what she can repair, what she can source. And she's not sort of out of touch with the rest of her friends. There's a lot of people doing that, I think, now, trying to get more individuality and just something which feels a little bit more unique and perspective. So they might not be doing it for environmental reasons, but certainly for cost reasons and individuality, that sits there. But kind of going back to the thing around people coming in, we see a lot of people wanting to know, what should they be looking for in the countryside? They know that there is something happening with the world and they want to be better informed. So people come in sometimes saying, and we've always had Silent Spring on the shelves and Silent Spring Revisited. And if people say, where did it start? We say, okay, you want to be looking 60 years ago. And they're, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So you find the right way to connect with different people at different ages, but particularly the younger people, we do find are worried. They want to know what they don't know. They want to know what's being hidden from them a little bit. Some people come and say, oh, it's books. I had one once. I don't need another one. True story. But for the most part, we find people are very engaged and curious.
Is there not some, Rosemary, are you there? Is there not some suggestion in your comment that you think there's a bit of hypocrisy here, that young people might appear to be climate aware, but only when it suits them?
No, I wouldn't level that criticism at them. I think what I would say is that there are climate aware, environmentally aware people in all generations, and that we shouldn't generalize by a particular group that somebody's decided has an age cutoff. And by the same token, somebody's writing all this greenwash as well. And how old are they? I think, there is a small percentage of people of all ages who get the environment thing, who get climate change, who get what needs to be done, and they are active, and they are reading the right books, and they are making the right consumer choices. But I don't think that they belong to any particular generation. And I think that there is a proportion who are writing all this rubbish, and they are young people, middle-aged people, older people. I think it's just society.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody else got any comment?
Yeah, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. From some of the climate resilient coaching that we're doing, I think really to understand those young people is important. And they're trying, and I get all your points, Rosemary. They are incredibly conflicted. There's this whole fashion thing about keeping up with their friends, etc. And they are trying to find that uniqueness. I agree, Amber. But there's a degree of being targeted. The marketing from fast fashion to that age group, or those younger age group people, it is really, really aggressive. And it just raises that anxiety level. And that it's related to social media, and all these things have become moved away from sort of a nice to have to being more of an addiction. Somebody's peddling fast fashion like people were peddling tobacco or drugs in the past, which makes that generation incredibly anxious and conflicted on these things. I'm taking part in another one of these events around fashion in a couple of weeks' time, and I was just looking at the whole fast fashion, and I was amazed to find that 1 in 7 items is purchased and never worn before it's thrown away. Which is pretty incredible, really. But that's why, as I was saying earlier, greenwashing is a successful marketing strategy, because people who are writing this, we might call it rubbish, but it's successful. It's selling stuff. So maybe it's not the young people we need to blame. I know I'm not blaming them, but we're pointing the finger at. But it's all this industry behind. Sorry, my 2 pennies worth.
No, it's okay. There are some questions on the chat. Does anybody want to come in? Is that you want to come back, Joe?
Well, I just want to challenge Martin a bit there. I don't normally, but I just thought, because he's my mate, I'll give it a go. I think there are people who deliberately mislead. I've spent my whole career in comms, marketing, somewhere in that piece. And you know better than anybody, Martin, how much I dislike myth-truths and lack of scrutiny of truth. But I don't think everybody who is greenwashing is doing it deliberately. It is very, very easy to be very loose with language, but without meaning to cause harm. And I quite often, because I work with a lot of manufacturing companies, I might get something across my desk where a product has been launched and they're all very excited. The chief exec of a listed company, whatever, will say, we've got a net zero product. You haven't. But it's not done with bad vibe. I think it's been done because they don't know better about the things to do. And the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, we note, has started to do some quite good online webinars and learning, where they have very easy to follow guidance on things like absolute and relative claims. about when you're writing words and ad copy and things like that. And it's amazing talking to marketeers, particularly sort of my sort of age groups, or 40s up, who are absolutely horrified that they may be have been doing something wrong, and they didn't intend to, because language is really easy to muck up, and it's no different to any other form of communication. You can have a chat to a friend, or you can ask a friend a question. Sometimes you say things you think, oh, I don't really mean to. I didn't think it came across like that. And of course, you've not read. And I think the greenwash thing there's part of that. Having said that, we all know the problem with, stuff like fossil fuels. I'm talking about the sort of the things you might see in your typical magazine, Sunday supplement, newspaper, whatever. It's not all the big stuff. Some of it's the lower level, and I don't think they're always meaning to do it.
Yeah, can I just come back on that very quickly, Joe? I totally agree. And as we said in the anti-greenwashing book, maybe it's those in the sustainability, environmental field who've created this language, which is very difficult for a lot of people to understand. I don't understand a lot of it. So yeah, it's easy to write that those marketing campaigns, and unintendedly, to fall foul of it. Yeah, the difference, as I said, the difference between zero carbon, carbon neutral, carbon positive, it's very nuanced. And it's good to see the ASA are doing those educational things of the marketing, of the copyright.
Before we leave the Gen Z topic, Mark Shivers, do you want to come in? I see you've made a comment on the chat. Are you there, Mark?
I am, yeah. I can hear me okay?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to come in on that?
Well, I'm not sure it adds a huge amount to the discussion that's had there before. I mean, I tend to agree with some of the earlier comments around the lived experience and the number of Gen Z and millennial attendees tonight tends to suggest that the statistics that show their concern about climate change isn't backed up by what's going on. And I had seen some other reports that sort of suggested other ways. I've also worked with Deloitte a lot in the past, which always causes me to question on whose behalf they are writing, and what it is they're aiming for. And I guess this is around marketing products and how can you effectively market products, which is one lens that may not reflect the overall attitude of a group of people. And I think that's what this sort of research from Kings is saying. I guess, I don't know, I'm probably not adding anything new to the debate, to be honest. I think it is, a challenge of really is what Joanna presented from Deloitte. I think it's just a challenge as to whether that's quite as clear and clean as what we actually experience in terms of when we engage with Gen Z and others. And the link I put in the chat is a piece of research from King's, I believe it was, King's College, which has said it doesn't contradict the numbers in some terms, but it certainly challenges some of the other perceptions about, for example, their willingness to take action, and also quite worryingly, that actually how many of them think there's no point in doing anything because it's just too big an issue for them to solve. So I think, as I say, it just paints a slightly more nuanced picture than the Deloitte survey does.
I hate to suggest it to anyone, but is there not some suggestion here that young people with some education are more inclined to take action than those who don't have a good enough education, which is probably not their fault?
I think the element, had a quick look at the Deloitte research, and I think there is an element of self-selection in those. In other words, there's also the people who responded, maybe those people who are more inclined to be active, and therefore might have more of a positive, if you like, if you want to call it that, from our perspective, positive view of these things, because they are naturally more inclined to get involved in conversations around this area. So maybe that's where it comes from.
I think if you look, if I think about conversations I have with chief people officers in businesses of, big organisations, this is the thing that they find coming back from their own investigation. I'm not sure investigation is the right word, but their own work to understand what is going to draw talent to the business and the things that retain talent. And I realise, you know, you can cut, I'm not a statistician, I'm not a scientist, but you know, you can cut data all sorts of ways and you can tell whatever story you choose. You know, I've chosen to take a particular group of people tonight and a particular line with that, and I accept all you say. But you know, I think when I don't know what you do for a living or whatever, but you know, when you talk to people, certainly when I do, this is not confined to expensive consulting companies and their research reports. This is what's happening out there in the field. So I would sort of just kick back with that, really.
My comment about the education level was inspired a little bit by a comment of Amber's on the chat about activity at universities. Amber, do you want to just say anything about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of clients that I've worked with in the educational field and talked to them about how students are looking at sustainability, and the People and Planet is a student-led evaluation where they assess universities and colleges on their criteria. So it's very much student focused, but it's a proper weighted argument. It's interesting, if you look at the link there, you'll see there's a number of universities which are considered to have failed by just not doing anything around environment or around carbon reductions or around your sort of pension pots, particularly in universities, is a big challenge at the moment. So it's quite interesting to see where there is activity, it can be grouped there. But equally, one of the people that I've worked with in the past is a group of colleges up in an area of the country where, you know, taking their basic necessities is they need to be out earning money to support their families as soon as possible, and they don't have the luxury of thinking about sustainability. However, what this particular group of colleges is doing is training those students in things like renewable energy and, you know, kind of supporting a green jobs program. So they're becoming part of a fundamental change without realizing it, because their first key thought is financial security. So there's definitely a little bit of a balance there for sure.
Maybe we can change the subject a bit now. If there's, let me just scroll through, see if there's anyone got a pressing question. There's a question.
Richard, John's got his hand up and has.
Oh, sorry, where are we? Back again? I'm having to scroll across the top here. Is that you, John? Sorry, yes, I didn't see it. It was
Okay.
camouflaged.
I'm a little nervous about speaking because I'm used to speaking to some of this crowd about a subject that I know about, and this is rather new to me. So I'd like to congratulate all our speakers because every one of them delivers something of interest from me. Richard kind of warned us that we might not be able to sleep at nights after this session. I can reassure you I'll be sleeping all right. I find a lot of the input, particularly the B-Corp piece, quite reassuring that there are things we can do. There was a discussion earlier about, are these people who are greenwashing the bad guys? Are they evil? Are they conscious of what they're doing? I think we have to be realistic. If your personality is one of good communications, if you are educated and you want to make something of your life and you find yourself in a job that's called marketing, you'll be very tempted to do some greenwashing because you'll be required to. So let's be realistic and realize that it's not necessarily evil people, but people will find themselves in a job where they have to do what they have to do. And it's our job, surely, to just call it out, just to find out that it's happened and make sure it stops. So that's that thought. But I did raise the observation, and it's been commented on before, that tonight, Gen Z did not show up. And I wonder if we understand why. And I don't have an answer to that question, but I think if it would be worth a little discussion about where are they? Are they out there on their Facebook?
Do you have any members that we can?
I think that sounds like a question for you, Joe.
Oh, well, I'm not, but I don't run DCAN, do I? So the
No,
question,
you don't.
No, because the question for me is how I put in a point actually about communicating and engaging, didn't I? And so what I don't know, because obviously I'm a foreigner from over the border, is, you know, in your network, what have you done as a group? Do you have any members who are in those younger generations? What have you done to engage? And has that engagement, is it not worked, or is it that it's not happened? I mean, and Giles is probably, I can't see his face now, where's he gone? Oh, there he is.
He's about to speak.
Yeah.
I feel
Giles?
I should probably respond to that fair comment and your challenge, John. Yeah, as decan, we don't have anything like enough members from the younger generation, whether they are millennials or Gen Z, and how to attract, how to get an organization such as decan to be attractive to those people is one of the questions which you know, we have discussed quite a lot. We have had at some time in the past a youth group, and it was very hard to get it consistently off the ground. And we are currently in the process of trying to relaunch a youth group. But I think the truth is that the sort of style of organization we are is one which appeals to people who've got a little bit more time on their hands, perhaps, to delve into environmental issues. And we have a large number of people who are retired or semi-retired. And you know, it is fair to say that the people at the other end of the scale don't have that spare capacity to engage in community activity in the same way. So I think we haven't given up on it at all, because I think it's so important to make sure that we have as balanced a range of views as we can possibly get. But it is certainly a challenge trying to get young people engaged, and we would be delighted to hear any advice or you know, anything people want to say which might encourage us to be able to do it.
Giles, maybe it's as simple as you not being cool.
Richard.
Sorry.
I just wondered if Amber, who obviously would have a very sort of strong network, I mean, I just wondered if there was something, just trying to have a quick look on here, but you know, are there sort of other youth networks? I mean, I just wondered if there are other things happening and they associate all of these generations are kind of collecting at a watering hole which is elsewhere, you know, the feeding ground is elsewhere.
It looks like Martin's got his hand up. Have you got an answer to that, Martin?
I was going to volunteer something else actually, but Amber, do you want to respond to Joan?
Yeah, I can, John, that one very quickly. I mean, on the 22nd of June is the March for Nature. There are a huge number of young people and middle-aged people and people of all ages going to that, and particularly around things like the Right to Roam movement, around water pollution. All those people are engaging on typically Instagram, sometimes Twitter, but Instagram is much more visual, or Threads, and that's where the conversations are happening. They tend not to be on the Facebooks, they tend not to be in the streets, but social, because it's quick and it's immediate, and you've also got a degree of kind of citizen journalism there as well. That's where you'll find a lot of people doing the quick communicating.
Yeah, I was going to raise the same issue actually, Amber, around the March for Nature. It's young people in our group are expressing an interest to go. Are you putting on coaches? How can we get there? Anybody else going? You're right. I don't think it's necessarily on social media, but there's lots of sort of WhatsApp groups which are sharing all that. But I would say that's the Long Reach Environment Group, came into being from young people. So this was just pre-COVID, where we had school strikes for Friday, Greta Thunberg, and all that really raised the sort of conscience of young people, secondary school age people, and they just started asking around various groups, can you do something around plastic? And we became one of the sort of plastic-free towns related to the Surfers Against Sewerage, the SOS movement. Then COVID hit, and we are struggling, as it sounds you are, to really engage with young people again. Difficult to get into schools to talk to them, and difficult to get them to come along to our events. We have one or two who come along to help plant trees, etc., but nothing of these things that we should have. But yeah, I wish you best on trying it. If you know anything, let us know if you're in Lancashire. We'd
I'm
love to know.
tempted, John, rather Martin, I'm tempted to comment that I don't know much about Lancashire, but Dorset is a county where people come to die. So it's very much a retirement county.
Speak for yourself, Richard.
That's clearly reflected.
We come to Lancashire for the landscape and the scenery and the people and the food.
There's a hand I can see. Who was that? No, is that
Oh,
Giles?
it's only me. Martin is involved with some really interesting stuff through the Living Futures Europe scholarship scheme, etc. Aren't you, Martin? I just wonder if it's like you through Martin. Martin organises some extraordinary, powerful networks, and I was just reflecting really when Martin was talking just then that actually through Martin, I think I've met some of the most committed and passionate younger generations of professionals in their space. But I was just thinking, Martin, is it worth just sharing with those assembled some of the things that you do that wasn't time to go into in your intro, because that does demonstrate that committed sort of group of youngsters.
Yeah. So very quickly, for 4 years we ran a program, a European funded program. This is pre-Brexit, or just at the time we were leaving. So we had a bunch of money to engage young people, and you're right, Trent, that those post-grads, the people who've just come out of their degree level, incredibly enthusiastic and passionate about doing something for the environment. We had 400 young people working in groups around Europe, doing absolutely amazing things. And then I think you're also talking about the Zoom Regenerative series that we've been running on a monthly basis. And we've had some really passionate people who either work for an organization or passionate enough to start up their own business as sustainability professionals. Yeah, I have a lot of confidence in these young people. I think the type of people we were talking about earlier related to fashion, they are highly conflicted, and that's where all the eco-anxiety that we're seeing. And you can see that on, just dive into TikTok for a while, and you can see, the brilliant things which people are doing, but also their big issues about fear of starting a family, etc.
Giles, you've got your hand up, I see.
Once again, John has had his hand up a long time before me. John, you should go first.
Your hand is hidden, disguised in, or camouflaged by your background, John. Sorry.
Never mind, Richard. Here we are. I had a bit of time to think and listen, and I'm just gonna say what's in my head now, answering my own question. Giles, you took it as a challenge. It's actually not a challenge. It was just an obvious question to ask tonight, and it's not a challenge. But I think we have the option in Dorset Can to consider that while it would be nice if there was more diversity, age and everything else, and we want people to feel welcome in Dorset Can, it may be the reality that because of the capacity of the aging population in Dorset to do something, Dorset Can could actually be just the old people doing what they should have done years ago. So I don't think we have to agonize too much about this. There's lots that can be done by old people, and I think we should just focus on getting on and doing those things.
Can I ask another question? Change the subject. Unless anyone else has got anything pressing, I can't see any hands.
Sorry, my hand went down.
Oh, sorry, Giles. Okay, no,
quickly. I
No,
just
go on.
wanted to say that one of the things we're doing, we organise along with two other organisations, the Dorset COP. Last year, this is our attempt to do it at a local level, what has been done at a much bigger level on the international front. So last year we ran a Dorset COP in Dorchester, but this year we're running the Dorset COP at Bournemouth University. And there are several reasons for that, but one of them is that we hope to attract many more younger people to be engaged in what we do. And it'll be really interesting to see whether that's successful or not. As we've got one of the co-organisers here, Mark Chivers, do you want to add anything to that about the choice of Bournemouth University and how we might be effective at attracting more young people? Sorry to put you on the spot, Mark.
That's okay, Giles. I think, to be honest, I think hopefully by holding it in a place that students will feel comfortable to come to, so familiar surroundings will help, but also by opening it up to people from the university as well, if they wish to run workshops that they feel will be of specific interest to students. I think that is also the thing. So I think that might be the way that we ensure attendance, is by actually, offering them the opportunity to run sessions on things they want to get involved in and discuss, rather than us assuming that we know things that will be attractive to them. So I think that's the challenge for us, really, in trying to engage that age group. Not that it shouldn't contradict the previous comments about all the other things that people of a certain age can also contribute to. So if there are people here who would like to get involved in running something there, then please do so.
The clock is ticking, and I've got a question I'd like to put to all the speakers this evening on a wider topic, and that is, I'm getting quite a few people, and lately Finlo Costain, who's known to a lot of people locally for his work in food and farming, is questioning the use of the word sustainable. He's notoriously quoted as saying sustainable crap is still crap. So he wants the word sustainable replaced with the word regeneration or regenerative. Can the speakers comment on that, please?
Who do you want to go first?
Well, who's going to volunteer to go first?
Well, I'll happily chip in. I'm actually considering doing another little book, Richard, a bit like the Greenwash book, called Mind Your Language, because I sort of have some sort of empathy with the point you've just made, or the person you're quoting. I think you have to be very careful with language, and I think we should all be more careful with language. And I think it is very easy, and that's why greenwash is the topic it is, very, very, very loose and not very specific. And I would like it to be clearer what those words mean. And so I have a lot of sympathy for that point, and not more empathy for that point, and would be quite supportive of it, actually. I think the problem is with all of these things, it's never, we all have different ideas about what it means. It's like, well, I'm a healthy person, or what does it mean? What do any of these words mean? I think if we could be more absolute, it would be easier, wouldn't it? But I think a focus from everybody about use of language is what's needed, and that's my parting shot.
I know you're very good at it, Joe. Martin, do you have a comment on this regenerative?
I do. Like Joe, I agree with that comment that we should ban the word sustainable. I mean, it can mean so many different things to so many different people. I use the word regenerative, which links us to nature. So we see ourselves as part of nature and not apart from, whereas sustainability is very much, at least these days, very much a corporate thing. We're reducing carbon, reducing waste, we're reducing pollution, which is all good, but we don't have time to keep reducing. We don't have the luxury to be less bad. We need to be more good. We need to be regenerative on what we do, and sustainability just doesn't cut it. And we have Joe and I have a good friend who lectures in universities on architecture, and she's banned the word sustainability from anyone's work. They'd have to explain what it is and why it's good for the environment, why it's good for people. So it's banned words like sustainability and eco-friendly, etc. So I agree with the comment. Let's get rid of it.
It sounds like you're almost suggesting, Martin, that the word sustainability is a greenwash word.
It can be. I mean, it can be good. It can do good things, but most often it's let's just reduce.
Amber, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think the way the word is used has to be in the right context. So absolutely friendly means nothing. A green product means nothing. It might just be the nice color of it. But when you think about sustainability more broadly, like the Sustainable Development Goals, you're talking about sustainability for people and communities. You're talking about having, in a business, for us, sustainable business growth is not just about reducing our environmental impact, but growing our business in a way that supports our local workers, our local communities, all of those elements. So I think there is a degree there that it needs to be used in the right frame and in the right context. What is interesting is we're seeing a shift in language. I mentioned earlier on things like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. They're changing the language there. So instead of talking about emissions, they're talking about air pollution. And so you're seeing less terms like, global warming being, global burning. So the kind of the dynamic of the language being used is shifting, but unless you're working in that sphere, you tend not to see it as much.
Okay, Giles, do you want to say anything about this this
Oh,
issue of sustainability versus regeneration?
I think the one thing I'd say is that, coming to this a little bit later in life, I had no real idea what sustainability really meant. And I came across one of the definitions is from the UN World Commission on Environment and Development. I mean, many of you will know this, but I didn't until relatively recent. And that definition is that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that was totally not what I was expecting as a definition. And I think that takes a bit of thinking about that. It's about, between the generations, making sure that what you do today doesn't compromise those who are coming from the future. And I think it was a really interesting definition, that one which actually causes you to think about what it really means. So that to me was quite powerful, and I just share that with you.
Well, I'll
very quickly on that. Sorry, Richard. Very quickly on that, Giles. That was in 1987. That definition of doing nothing today to compromise future generations, and we've done really well on that, haven't we? Future generations in a worse place now than they were back then. So yeah.
And I was going to comment, Giles, that my problem with that definition is that it's entirely about the human race. It makes no mention whatsoever of biodiversity, about nature, about the non-human multitude of species that inhabit this earth.
Please give Sam a chance to say something.
Go on, John.
John.
Sam. Unmute yourself, Sam.
Well, so now we've changed from transition town breadport to sustainable breadport. Now we've got to be regenerative breadport. We did to sustainable breadport because people understood what it meant. If you keep changing a name, then you're becoming a bit sort of esoteric. That most people know what we're on about. And if you sort of, I mean, I can see global warming. People think that's nice and cozy, and we ought to have global, global heating and then crisis and all the other things. But actually, if you're talking to ordinary people, it's worth using the words that they understand. We're not an academic discipline where we sort of have to use exactly the right words. Oh, you mustn't use that anymore. You must use this. We know what we mean. That and we even know what green means. I mean, it's perfectly true that, for instance, greener homes was called eco homes, and I dropped that because all the builders are building eco homes, it seems now, and that we weren't doing eco homes. We want greener, and now greener probably you say it's not really the right thing to do. We need to do something else. But I think we need to be careful about defining our terms and alienating the ordinary person who understands what you meant before but don't understand now.
You want to come back, John?
Yeah, it was on something else, but I think that's right, Sam. Absolutely right. Earlier, when we were talking about age groups, I raised a question, but I don't really think that is an area of sensitivity for Dorset County to focus on. But this mind your language thing truly is. Now, to a certain generation, mind your language means don't use the F word. To another generation, it might mean be gentle. Remember, somebody's got a mental health problem. But to me, and in the context of what Joanna was talking about, it means tell the truth. If it is uncomfortable, still tell it. And it won't necessarily be rude if what you say hurts a bit. So Giles and I will be having conversations about this, because we have to collaborate and we have to be able to communicate. And minding language does not mean withhold the comment that's in your head that you're bursting to say just because it might upset somebody. That's enough said.
Well, I'd certainly resonate with that myself, John. As a matter of fact, we're running a little bit close on the time now.
Yes, Richard, I was just going to say, you originally this was advertised as finishing at 2:45.
Well,
so
I'm now. Thank you,
might-
Giles, for reminding me. I was. That's it. You're being the headmaster. I'm just scrolling through to see if anyone else has got a particularly pressing question. Has anyone else got a question they want to raise? Right. In that case, I will thank everyone for attending. I will thank in particular the speakers, Martin, Joe, Amber, and Giles. Has everyone gone already? And thank you for coming. I don't know what our next big event is going to be. Giles, do you know what our next talk is going to be about? That you can broadcast it or publicize it right here and now?
We've got a couple coming up, but not for a few months. We're going to run one on offsetting, which is a similar controversial subject, and we're going to run one on the pros and cons of wood burning, particularly wood burning stoves. So that'll be interesting too.
Offsetting wouldn't be another greenwash word, would it?
Probably.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I think that's the end of our session this evening. Nice to see you all, and see you again soon, I hope.
And thank you very much indeed for Richard for hosting and
Richard.
putting together the greenwashing event. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Nice work.
Bye, everybody. Thanks very much.